Proceedings of the opening ceremony will begin shortly. Honorable Secretary General, esteemed Deputy Secretary Generals, student officers, the Middle School MUN Committee joining us over the live stream, distinguished delegates, Dr. Bush-Jansa, Mr. Executioner, directors, and guests. On behalf of the BERMUN2 team, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 20th annual session of the BERMUN2 conference. My name is Jonas Baudy, and I have the honor of serving as President of the General Assembly at this year's conference. Seated to my left is Mila Ward, and to my far left and right are Louise Massen and James Demanowitz, who will be serving as this year's Deputy Secretary Generals. On behalf of all participants, we would like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their support of our conference for the past 19 years. We have greatly appreciated the assistance of Dr. Bush-Jansa and Herr Felix Bäume. In addition, we would like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Clemens Brüggemann for his help in making this conference a success. We are grateful that Dr. Bush-Jansa, the Deputy Head of Political Education and Manager of Political Education Forums, will address us on behalf of the CAS. Dr. Bush-Jansa, you now have the floor.
Dear participants, congratulations on taking part in this year's Berlin Model United Nations Conference. I'm delighted to look at so many committed young people. On behalf of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. It's a great pleasure for us to host this conference at our academy. This is a forum for dialogue between politics, business, science and society. Just recently, we have welcomed Federal President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and today you're taking the floor. As some of you may know, this year's conference is a very special one. Maybe we can call it a milestone. The Berlin Model United Nations Conference is celebrating its 20th anniversary. For 2 decades, BERMUN2 has provided a platform for young, committed minds to explore global challenges and develop innovative solutions. For 20 years, this conference has thrived on the commitment of young people like you, young people who not only think about themselves, but also invest their free time to make our society a better place. You can be proud of you. It is a privilege to address you as individuals because your undertaking corresponds with the mission of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, shaping democracy together. Through our work, we contribute towards securing and increasing peace, freedom, and prosperity in Europe and throughout the world. Through our dedicated work, we strengthen the democratic and constitutional forces and institutions in Germany, Europe, and around the globe. We motivate, provide qualifications, and activate younger generations with respect to democracy. Shaping democracy together. That is not only our mission statement, it's your mission for the next 3 days. Democracy cannot function without engaged people who carry on the spirit of democracy. As participants of the BERMUN conference, you will have the unique chance to experience the dynamic of multilateral negotiations firsthand. This is a one-in-a-lifetime experience that will not only give you a full grasp of the complexity of international relations, but just as important, you have the opportunity to meet and learn from so many peers who all share a passion for the pressing questions of our time. In today's world, the idea to reach consensus among countries so different in history, culture, and perspective seems more and more an idealistic approach. But the idea of shared democratic values is not outdated. Through your deliberations, you will weigh your own personal interests and values against those opposing contrary beliefs, and it's a challenge to stick to the principles all members of the United Nations have agreed on. A common understanding of human rights and political values is something we have to work on over and over again. This year, you have chosen to focus on fighting inequality, as we live in a world where inequality shapes the lives of billions of people every day. It manifests itself in, for example, in unequal access to education and healthcare, and in the marginalization of entire communities. These inequalities are not only unjust, but also dangerous, as they undermine social cohesion and fuel unrest. Eliminating inequality is one of the challenges of our time, requiring global cooperation, shared responsibility, and innovative solutions. We know that the fight against inequality is not an easy task. It requires courage, perseverance, and the conviction that change is possible against all odds. It also requires cooperation between nations, organizations, and individuals. Each of us has a role to play, whether by advocating for just policies or simply standing in solidarity with those whose voices are too often marginalized. You have the potential to change the status quo, to ask difficult questions, and to push for solutions. This conference is a perfect example of how young people from different backgrounds can tackle an issue together. BERMUN is a space where ideas flourish, where dialogue bridges different perspectives, and where a better future comes feasible. This conference is a reminder to all of us that every effort we make to fight inequality is a step towards a better world. Your voices matter, and your actions can bring the change we need. We must keep in mind that regardlessly of which global challenges we are addressing, it will be impossible for one country to face it on its own. In joining the conference, you are preparing yourself for the role you will be assuming in the very near future, and I'm sure the next 3 days will have an impact on your views on the world and hopefully on the rest of your life. Now I wish you lively debates, a lot of interesting insights, and above all, a lot of fun.
Thank you, Dr. Busch-Janser, for your kind welcome and for speaking on the impact of BERMUN and its connection to the work of the CAS. We appreciate your comments and once again extend our thanks to the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their continuous continuous support. Please accept this token of our appreciation.
We are also thankful for the support of the John F. Kennedy School. Our binational school represents the long history of the transatlantic partnership between Germany and the United States. This relationship is currently under fire. Yet, our school remains determined to make this partnership work. We are pleased to have both our American principal, Ms. Erin Hale, and our German principal, Herr Robert Bartz, joining us virtually today. They have dedicated their time to creating a video together. Please direct your attention to the screen.
Spring BERMUN Conference. It's a great pleasure to have so many of you here today.
One moment, we'll get the video for you. If someone in the tech department is playing music, we don't know where the music is coming from. It's not from ours. Oh. There we have it. Oops. All good.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the opening ceremonies of this year's Spring BERMUN Conference. It's a great pleasure to have so many of you here today, students, educators, distinguished guests, gathered in the spirit of diplomacy, collaboration, and meaningful discussion. We apologize for not being able to join you in person today at our school. We're engaging in purposefully and important conversations about bilingual and bicultural development, but we appreciate the opportunity to welcome you virtually.
Before we begin, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for their ongoing support of BERMUN. Their generosity and commitment make this conference possible, and we are especially grateful to Dr. Sandra Busch-Jansa for her leadership in welcoming us once again.
A special thank you as well to Felix Baumel, who has worked closely with us in planning this event, and to Clemens Brueggemann, whose dedication ensures that BERMUN continues to thrive year after year. Your hard work does not go unnoticed.
We are also excited to welcome this year's keynote speaker, Stephen Exo Kreischer. Your unique insights and experiences will undoubtedly enrich our discussions on global inequality and sustainable solutions.
This year we are proud to welcome over 300 students and teachers from across South Africa, England, France, Denmark, and Germany. Your participation is what makes this conference special. The opportunity to engage with diverse perspectives, challenge assumptions, and collaborate across borders is what makes BERMUN such a unique experience.
We also want to take a moment to recognize the incredible team that makes this conference happen. To the BERMUN team of directors, the Secretariat, and our dedicated student officers, thank you. Your passion, professionalism, and countless hours of preparation have ensured that we can come together for another inspiring event.
As public school educators, we believe deeply in the power of education to combat inequality. Schools are more than just a place for learning. They are the foundation for opportunity. Yet we also recognize that education is not always equal. Resources, funding, and access vary wildly. Our role as educators is to bridge those gaps, to provide students with the tools to think critically, engage in meaningful discourse, and advocate for a more just world.
This year's theme, Fighting Inequality, could not be more relevant in today's uncertain global climate. We are witnessing growing disparities, economic instability, social and political divides, and the long-term effects of global crisis. In these unpredictable times, education is more than just a pathway to success. It is a foundation for resilience, civic engagement, and hope. The conversations you have here at BERMUN are not theoretical. They reflect real challenges that demand real solutions.
As you engage in debates, draft resolutions, and listen to different perspectives, we encourage you to think beyond this conference. How can the ideas you discuss here shape the world outside these walls? How can you, as young leaders, use what you learn to create change in your communities?
We urge you to take full advantage of the next few days. Speak up, ask questions, challenge perspectives. but most importantly, listen. You all bring unique experience and insights, and this conference is a space for learning from one another.
Once again, welcome to the Spring Conference for BERMUN. We look forward to seeing where your conversations and collective efforts lead. Let's make this an inspiring and impactful conference together.
Although they could not join us in person today, due to a mandatory school meeting, we thank Ms. Hale and Herr Bartz for the video discussing the role of education and educators in fighting inequality. Thank you for your support of our program.
At this time, we would also like to thank JFKS student Evelyn Fogel, who has worked hard to realize our conference theme in this year's artwork. The art shows 3 raised fists, symbolizing resistance against all forms of inequality in their varying extremes. The diverse hands represent different ethnicities, identities, and social classes, highlighting that this is a struggle shared across the globe. Let us give Evelyn a round of applause. Over the next 2 days, we will be debating several topics related to our conference theme, Fighting Inequality. Therefore, we would like to invite Louisa, one of this year's Deputy Secretary Generals, to take the floor to elaborate on the connection between the committee topics and our conference theme, Fighting Inequality. Louisa has been a dedicated member of the BERMUN team for nearly 4 years. Her impressive work ethic and precision to detail has kept us all on our toes. She made sure everything was done when it needed to be, made us laugh, and was an unmatched help in preparing for the conference. Madam Deputy Secretary General, the floor is yours.
You dropped 40 euros on this conference. 40 euros could pay for 3 months of school for one little girl in Ghana. For 40 euros to mean less to you than it does to others, your life likely reflects a certain level of privilege. For the majority of you, your biggest worry is perhaps the upcoming test, the fight you had with your parents, or when you can hang out with your friends. Most likely, it is not how to feed your family or how to keep the lights on. Your concerns and worries are valid, but your experience is not universal. Consequently, fighting inequality has been a long-standing goal of the United Nations, as seen by the 10th Sustainable Development Goal, reducing inequalities. Inequality refers to a difference in status, rights, and opportunities. Distinctions can be made between societal, economic, and natural inequality. Societal inequality refers to the unequal distribution of rights and opportunities among individuals and social groups. This can manifest as gender, ethnic, class, or religious inequality. The latter is reflected in claims of religious persecution that the International Court of Justice will address in the Armenia versus Azerbaijan case. The Disarmament Committee will discuss ethnic inequalities in post-conflict zones, where minorities are often excluded from society and economic opportunities. Although similar to societal inequality, economic inequality describes the unequal distribution of specifically economic means, such as income and wealth. The International Labor Organization will discuss improving minimum international labor standards, where those with innate disabilities or chronic illnesses are unable to perform certain jobs and are therefore disadvantaged in the labor market. The foundation of these inequalities is natural inequality. established by nature and referring to differences in age, health, bodily strength, qualities of the mind, the geographical place of birth, or family background. Such differences are largely beyond human control. Natural, societal, and economic inequalities are interconnected, forming a self-sustaining cycle of disadvantage. While the UN cannot eliminate natural inequality, the intersections between natural disparities and its socially constructed counterparts must be addressed. Children will be born in different geographic regions, but that should not lead to societal and economic disadvantage. Thus, the Security Council will deal with the Democratic Republic Congo, where initiatives for women's empowerment and resource redistribution efforts are helping to improve living conditions for future generations. Likewise, the middle school MUN will be addressing how to protect women in conflict zones such as Iraq, thereby tackling both societal and economic inequalities. Such inequalities harm socioeconomic development, a core objective of the United Nations 2030 Agenda. We can achieve the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals to leave no one behind by fighting inequality on every level. Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa, for highlighting the committee topic's connection to the overall theme and for elaborating on the different types of inequality and how they relate to the committee topics.
We will now turn our attention to our keynote address. For the first time, the speech will be called the Solomon Iro Keynote Address. In 2019, Solomon Iro joined the MUN program as a smiling 8th grader. He participated as a delegate, then as a student officer, before he became the BERMUN2 Deputy Secretary General and BERMUN Secretary General in November 2023. Just before he graduated with his Abitur, he was diagnosed with cancer. He passed months later in December of 2024. Although there is deep sadness, we remember Solomon today not only because he passed, but because he lived. And we remember him today because of how he lived and contributed to this BERMUN program. In honor of him, the press team has created a video to remember Solomon and his legacy.
First question is, how do you remember Solomon and what was he like?
How do you remember somebody when they're so complex?
Welcome to BERMUN2 2024.
This is Solomon Iro, a former JFK's BERMUN delegate, student officer, and secretariat member who untimely passed away in 2024. In honor of his contributions, the BERMUN2 keynote address will henceforth be called the Solomon Iro Keynote Address.
I think Solomon was really a person where you can say he was very many things, and he was also very good at many things.
I remember him as a big presence, definitely, kind of like a mentor figure and just a leading spirit.
How did he change and contribute to BERMUN?
His ideas and how he put those ideas into a speech. He was a great speaker, not only rhetoric-wise, but also content-wise.
He did a lot to elevate the level of debate through how he acted as a delegate and on secretariat.
The attention of every single one in the room was on him.
Very, very bright, very committed, and very interested in ideas.
He sort of had that balance between being very outgoing, still being very caring, understanding, incredibly emotionally aware, but also just so incredibly intelligent.
Tell us something funny you remember from Solomon.
Sort of out of the blue, he made this Star Wars reference, like a really obscure, like nerdy thing about someone. We were talking about good diplomatic relations, and we were listing countries, and he said the Wookiees.
The first thing that comes to mind for me now is how horribly organized Solomon was, despite all of his many talents.
We went on the MUN New York trip. This daily intake of a bagel. So I will have a bagel on his birthday to remember him.
The person behind it all, and that side is a really sort of kind person who really deeply cares about other people.
Can you describe him in 3 words?
Incredibly smart, intelligent, and empathetic.
Outstanding, humble, kind.
A loving person.
Inspirational, I think.
No perfect person. Solomon was not perfect, but he is a model that is worthy of being followed.
Special is what he was, but in the purest sense.
It is my honor to now introduce this year's first ever Solomon Ero keynote speaker, Stefan Exo-Kreischer. He is the German director of the ONE campaign. ONE is a nonprofit organization combating extreme poverty, preventable disease, and gender violence in Africa. Among ONE's key achievements is the mobilization of $72 billion for the fight against malaria, tuberculosis, and AIDS. You now have the floor.
Thank you. I'm also a character on Minecraft. Just without the script, personal note, I have 3 kids, and I can only imagine how terrible it must be to lose a kid. So my heart goes out to the parents who are watching. Yeah, no words can describe this. Also a personal note on what you said about the John F. Kennedy School, transatlantic ties. I went as a kid to the United States, studied in the United States afterwards, went to the JFK Institute here at the Free University, participated in the National Model United Nations. So I am also a transatlanticist and a multilateralist at heart, and just came back from Munich on Sunday. And I must say, yeah, we are really in a different world, dire, I think. But I truly believe that there are so many ties between our continents and countries that we can overcome this and weather this storm, even though I think that the world order we're in is never going to go back to what we were used to. But it takes all of you and all of us, I think, to make sure that it is not going to end in what we have seen almost 80 years ago here on the European continent and in the entire world, because it's also, as we know, the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, and never again. So please, I implore you, help us to make sure that this doesn't happen. Now to my script. Thank you for inviting me here and for giving me the chance to speak to so many interested, brilliant young students. I'm really, truly happy to be here and to be able to speak to you, and that you have chosen this topic of inequality for this year's conference, because I think inequality between continents, between countries, in our societies is really one of the most important challenges that we have to face and to overcome. I would like to focus on specific inequality between the African continent and basically the rest of the world. And I hear we also have a school from South Africa here. And how many of you in general have been on the African continent? Show of hands. Really cool. Great. Little intro though on the One campaign. Thank you for the words. You might not have known us before. We are an international organization, nonpartisan, and our mission is to fight for a more just world. We are fighting for investments that are necessary to unlock economic growth or economic opportunities and healthy lives on the African continent. And our dream is of a world where Africa is actually an equal player amongst the other powers. And therefore, we are deeply convinced that the narrative about the African continent needs to change, especially but not only here in Europe. Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie describes the prevailing image of Africa in her TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, as follows. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. We at One are working to change this narrative, and we need partners, of course, and we have many and need more to change this narrative. We are highlighting that the fact that Africa is a diverse continent with so much more to offer than what's often portrayed by the media, literature, movies, and yes, also sometimes by the development community. Please don't get me wrong, I didn't come here to tell you that everything is fine. The subject of this conference is fighting inequality, and there are indeed various inequalities to be tackled within African societies, between African countries, between the African and the European continent and other continents. But the prevailing image that many in the so-called developed world have of Africa plays an important role in this. This year also marks the 140th anniversary of the Berlin Conference, where the colonial powers decided on national borders in Africa without an African at the table. The arbitrary drawing of borders, the division of people into ethnic groups, the exploitation of people and raw materials, together with the racism used to justify slavery and colonialism, are still apparent today. And I'm not saying this to make anyone feel guilty, but I'm convinced that if we don't understand the past, we can't really understand the present, and we will be limited in shaping a better future. So where does this leave us? First, as I said, there are numerous injustices and inequalities between the African and other continents. To name just a few, representation. There are 2 European permanent seats on the UN Security Council, not a single African one, and there are many more examples like this. There are unfair trade relations. Europe is Africa's largest trading partner, but while Europe often exports expensive and highly developed technology to Africa, or agricultural surplus, often undermining local markets, destroying the livelihoods of farmers there, African countries often export unprocessed raw materials. This means that there's insufficient value added in African countries. Resources is also another inequality. African countries are highly disadvantaged when it comes to accessing capital on the financial markets. And I want to emphasize this point because it's key focus for us at the One campaign. Access to capital is critical. It determines whether governments can invest in health, in education, in poverty reduction, or in gender equality. And 21 of the 36 highly indebted low-income countries are in Africa. More than 60% of African countries spend more on debt repayments than they spend on health or education. They simply have to. More on debt repayments than on health and education. And on top of this, debt repayment has now surpassed external inflows to governments' budgets, including new lending and official development assistance, ODA. So the result is that there's more money flowing out of developing countries than is flowing in, net. And we are still waiting for the latest data, but projections from One show that this could amount to 50 billion in 2024. So you could argue that this is, of course, the fault of the respective governments. Why did they take on so much debt? And there's probably a grain of truth in that. However, as so often, the answer is not that easy. It is important to acknowledge that African countries, as we in Europe, are dealing with a variety of challenges. COVID-19, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and other geopolitical issues have contributed to a shift in the global economy. which led to a decline in affordable borrowing options. This has resulted in a rise in interest rates, in energy costs, food prices, so on, and caused local currencies to depreciate against the dollar. And investors have gradually, or are gradually actually, withdrawing their funds from developing countries. And additionally, African countries are facing unfair conditions on the global financial markets. Between 2020 and 2022, the cost of bonds in emerging markets have doubled. African countries pay much higher interest rates because credit rating agencies, most of them, the most important ones, actually there are only three, the three credit rating agencies that matter are all based in the United States. And they use models to determine the credit ratings based on GDP, overemphasizing risks such as political instability or exchange rate volatility, and ignoring opportunities such as natural resources and young populations. And I actually had the honor of moderating a panel at the Hamburg Sustainability Conference last year on the role of credit rating agencies in access to capital for African countries. And one of the representatives from a credit rating agency actually said, he said it's actually not that bad anymore. We are meeting, and he meant all of the credit rating agencies, we are meeting with African governments once a year. I'm not sure how much you know of the system, but it's just unthinkable that a credit rating agency would just meet once a year with the German Finance Ministry or the US Treasury. It's just unthinkable. So it's actually not a positive thing to put out there. And especially if you remember that those little letters, AAA or less, matter so much for millions of people. And what it means in costs is that it costs Africa almost $75 billion a year that they pay this premium. And this is actually 80% of all of Africa's annual infrastructure investment needs. So we could cover 80% of the annual infrastructure investment needs with those 80% that go into the premium. So third, Africa is ready. And 10 of the 20 fastest growing economies are in Africa. The continent is set to experience an average growth rate of 4% in 2024 and 2025. The health sector has made remarkable progress in recent decades. The average healthy life expectancy, so the number of years that a person can live in good health, has increased by 10 years from 2000 to 2019. School graduation rates have increased significantly from 2000 to 2022. And Africa is the youngest continent with an average age of just 19 years. I think the number of people under 25 living on the African continent is more than the entire population of the EU. And by 2050, Africa will have added 796 million people to the workforce, while Europe's working age population will decline by 156. And the African economy is set to boom with the strategic resources like cobalt, lithium, rare earth, and expanding market. By 2040, the African economy could triple in size. So we must ask ourselves, especially I think in a new world order that we are in now, where do we go from here? How can we overcome those inequalities that I've talked about? How can we become to an equal partnership with the African continent, with countries on the African continent? And I personally believe it is so important to create a just and stable future for everyone, no matter where they are born. Because where you're born shouldn't determine, or where you live shouldn't determine whether you live. We must invest in economic opportunity, invest in health systems, and ensure equal access to financial resources. We must see Africa as an equal partner. Africa must have a seat at the table so that Africa never again is discussed without Africa. To conclude, our future depends on that equal partnership and on a sustainable partnership. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your insights into the inequality between industrialized countries and Africa, and how we can and why we should reduce it. Delegates and chairs, you now have time to ask questions to Herr Exo Kreischer. Once called on, please use the microphone in front of you. If you do not have a microphone in front of you, please use your loud speaking voice. Thank you. So, if there are any questions in the House, please raise your placards or hands now. Delegate of the United Kingdom.
Well, first off, thank you very much for your speech. I do have one question because I feel that one particular player has been left out of your speech, and it's China. My question is, what or how do you think that China's growing influence in Africa will affect African equality towards other global players, and is the Chinese influence there a threat perhaps? And if it is, how do we combat it? Or do we even combat it?
Well, I think it is not, again, the answer is not easy and clear-cut. I do think that there are projects driven forward, funded by the Chinese government, can be positive and have a positive effect. Well, what we can also see that it's often that the contracts the contracts that many African governments enter into with the Chinese governments are not really beneficial to African governments. We see now that 20 years ago when one was founded, we just came out of a severe debt crisis for low-income countries, and the high-income countries made the decision to cut that debt. And back then, most of the debt was held in the Paris Club, so G7 countries, G8 countries mostly. And now most of the debt, or a significant part, is actually owed to China and to the private sector, so much more complicated. But it shows, though, that for financing, especially of infrastructure projects, a lot of countries on the African continent went into debt that is actually really unsustainable, went into contracts that were not to their favor, and that is a big problem. So that's also a big problem for solving the current debt crisis, because of course, the United States, Germany, others say, we're not going to forgive you any debt because you're just going to use it to repay China or the private sector. What can we do to ensure that there's maybe an equal footing on the African continent? Well, first of all, you shouldn't dismantle US aid and cut foreign aid, although I think we should also stop calling it aid, to be honest, which in German usually we don't do it anymore. But I think you must recognize that what you do with development cooperation, with development financing, with diplomacy, vis-a-vis the African countries is actually essential to building sustainable partnerships with African countries, and also to a degree limiting China's influence there. I think we shouldn't underestimate the geopolitical consequences of exiting development cooperation. But also I think what Europe and the United States and the rest of the world need to do is they need to stop with the hypocrisy that they have shown time and time again towards the African continent. Look at the COVID-19 pandemic, where Africa was told to get in the back of the line when it came to access to vaccines. That is just not cool, and you shouldn't do that in a partnership. The G7 said they wouldn't invest in any new fossil fuel projects anymore, even though African governments said we need transition energy, we need gas projects. The EU was adamant, no, we're not going to finance any new fossil fuel projects. A couple of days after EU summit, Russia invades Ukraine. EU goes, well, maybe we could talk about some fossil fuel projects. I mean, this is just not a good strategy if you really want to become an equal partner. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Delegate of Myanmar.
The Trump administration has just cut its workforce of USAID employees in Africa to 12 people. Do you believe that there is any merit in attempting to renegotiate aid, or whatever you want to call it, with the US? Or do we have to, as a global community, try and find other means of funding and move away from American funding?
I think we need to all continue advocating for why development cooperation, why that partnership, why also financing and funding those kind of partnerships is important, also in the United States context. But on the other hand, I mean, I think we also need to work on pathways to sustainability. It can't be that one person on the other side of the Atlantic, thousands of miles away, decides something from today to tomorrow and millions of people's lives are in danger, or actually millions of people are dying. It's just not, that's not sustainable. So we need actually to diversify funding. We need to make sure, as I said, African governments have access to capital that they need to invest. We need to hold African governments, of course, also accountable, because they are first and foremost responsible for their citizens. So I say let's not give up on the model of cooperation, development cooperation, also here and there. Aid, I think humanitarian aid, for example, is something that has a great value, but also think about pathways of how do we get into a system where in a couple of decades, hopefully, we will be in a place where things like we see them now happening are not going to happen anymore.
Thank you. With that, we'll take 1 to 2 more questions, depending on the time. Delegate of China.
You spoke early in your speech about how part of the problem was that industries are not localized in African countries. How do foreign governments or foreign actors help to localize industries so that these countries can profit off of it, particularly when governments are perhaps leftovers from neocolonialism, or are not doing their jobs properly? So how can we as outside helpers localize these industries?
Yeah, I mean, good point in pointing out, of course, the responsibility of the respective national governments as well. I think what is necessary are continuous discussions and negotiations around contracts. Like, for example, it's very important for Germany at the moment to see where green hydrogen could be gotten from. In Namibia, for example, is one of those places where the German government sees potential to, together with the Namibian government, build plans to make green hydrogen. And it is essential, I think, that the German government is held accountable by civil society actors and academia and others, but also the Namibian government, and I'm just using this example, that when those projects are actually realized, that within the contracts, within the projects, it is embedded that the value add will also benefit the region and the country, and is not just going into the pockets of a few elites, and then and the rest will go to I don't know, the German company or whoever will build this. So it is about dialogue, negotiations, also putting pressure on I think both sides that are negotiating, from civil society and other actors, so that we ensure that it's actually mutually beneficial not only for elites but also for the populations.
Thank you. We will be taking another question. Delegate of the Russian Federation, which one of you would like to speak? Are you Yes, ladies first, good manners.
So I just wanted to thank you for your speech as well. And personally, we do believe that transparency is very important for cooperation and equality to work. And we wondered, how do you think that we can encourage different international governments to actually make themselves more transparent for others to understand and to work together?
Well, depends on the government, of course. The degree of difficulty, I think, depends on the government. But I would agree with you that transparency is absolutely necessary. It's a vaccine against corruption and so many other things. I think it's fighting the good, but also the hard fight. It's supporting international fora who try to drive forward transparency measures, The EU, for example, has implemented a registry on who is actually the beneficial owner of companies or other constructs. Well, it was kind of driven forward by when the EU found out that they didn't know where to freeze the assets of Russian oligarchs because they didn't really wanted to implement such a registry before. But when the Russian invasion came to Ukraine, there was some pressure, and they established such a registry, which then helped them to freeze Russian funds in Germany and across the EU. So sometimes context change, and that can be fortuitous for you, so it can help you. But it is really a long and sometimes a difficult way of just keep on continuing pressuring governments, following international negotiations within the G20 and other fora on the EU level, on the German level, or French governments, whoever, and working with civil society and other actors to ensure that transparency measures are implemented, and then are actually, when transparency alone, of course, is not the cure, you also then need to have actions following on when something is shown in those transparency measures that something isn't going right. Because transparency alone, I realize, is also not, of course, a cure.
Thank you. As to reward your politeness, would the other delegation of Russia also like to ask a point of information to our speaker?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to ask, we as students are often left out of decision making on this high level. So I wanted to ask you, how can we have an impact in these high level negotiations?
Yeah, good question, thank you. Because it also enables me to tell you about a great program we have at the One campaign. So, no, I mean, I think there are many processes in international negotiations that are opening up to youth engagement. In the United Nations context, you have several youth negotiation tracks. Was it the Y20? I think there's Youth 20 on the G20, which I think is a great invention where young people can make sure that they at least are heard on some level of the stage. But it is also, I think, necessary for students, for young people to go to their, if they can, of course, depending on where you live, to go to your representative and make your arguments heard there. Tell those that represent you what you care about, and that they should also care about those things, because you are the future. And now to my little commercial. So at the One campaign, we have a program in Europe, which is my favorite program, actually. It's called the Youth Ambassador Program, where across Europe we have between 200 and 300 young people between the age of 18 and 30, more or less, who we select for a year, who we train, and what is advocacy, what is campaigning, how do you do media work. Many of those young people stay with us for many years. Most prominent in Germany, former youth ambassador might be Luisa Neubauer. Some of you might know her. She sometimes says in interviews that she learned what she's doing at the One campaign, so I'm always very happy when she does that. But it is actually, it's so powerful if you see those young ambassadors, those youth ambassadors, go into meetings with members of parliament, either in Berlin, in Brussels, in Paris, or in the constituencies, and really nail home the point that everyone in parliament should care about the partnership with the African continent, the fact that there are still too many people dying of HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, so on and so forth. Applications open up at the end of the year. Check out one.org.
Thank you.
Thank you, Herr Exo-Kreischer, for your time and efforts in making this ceremony all the more interesting. We ask that you accept this token of our appreciation.
Thank you.
The BERMUN video team has prepared an opening video for this conference. Please direct your attention to the screen.
In 1992, the JFK's teacher, Dr. Walter Peterson, and two students, Stefan Erbe and Lars Day, founded BERMUN to establish dialogue between students from East and West Berlin. At that first MUN conference, only a handful of students actually showed up.
But as BERMUN grew bigger and bigger, the team's hard work attracted attention from various international institutions, including an NGO owned by the Merrill Lynch Bank.
With a generous donation, BERMUN's directors and secretariat not only went on a wonderful trip to the Bahamas, but also founded BERMUN2, the conference specifically designed for people from Brandenburg and Berlin and its surroundings.
We wholeheartedly thank this bank for funding a place where thousands of committee romances and committee observations have since come into being, creating generations of professional diplomats.
After a year of 2 conferences at the John F. Kennedy School in Berlin, BERMUN began getting in touch with another major institution, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. Beginning in 2006, it hosted us in its wonderful venue. This year marks our 19th year anniversary of the partnership between BERMUN and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and we would like to truly thank it for its support. We're now interrupting for a short intermission, and we'll be discussing politics, equality, and the future diplomats of our world with strangers at the Brandenburg Gate. Hi everyone, we're here with Martin and
Clara.
Seid ihr dabei? Who are we here with?
With the Ligeka, we are the German Karnevals group from the Saarland.
Are you in favor of equality? Yeah. Yeah?
Of course.
Ja, auf jeden Fall. What would you say to the politicians right now?
Guten Tag. Auf Wiedersehen. Meiner Ansicht wäre auf Wiedersehen angebrachter.
Wenn Gleichberechtigung eine WG wäre, wäre Berlin dann die Küche oder das Bad?
Sag ehrlich, Berlin wäre das Wohnzimmer.
The bathroom for me.
Die E-Table is the best place. Gute Frage. Ja, das stimmt. I think Berlin is a whole big toilet.
Are you in favor of youth and politics?
A bit, but not so much.
Not so much?
Yes. But I know that he does.
I mean, not much, but I think I know the basics.
Yeah. Should they be there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Should the youth be allowed to vote?
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, but they have to have education at school.
No.
No, we are too old for this.
We only make fun. Every day, the whole year, 24/7. We don't care about politics, we don't care about any social problems. It doesn't matter.
Make politics more fun. Do you have any ideas? I think the politicians will do it themselves.
What do you have to say to the future diplomats, to the young people right now?
Have more fun, drink a lot of beer, and if you can't eat it or then it doesn't matter.
All right, guys, thank you so much. That was wonderful. I hope you have a great evening. That was the interview. Well, thank you guys very much. That was very insightful. Bye bye.
Ich wollte kurz sagen, du bist bis uns gehört, Potter.
Thank you, Charlotte, Lucien, Alfred, Iona, Nina, and Ella, for giving us such an enthusiastic and informative start to our conference. The video will surely inspire our discussions on how we can collectively fight inequality. Please join us in giving them a much-deserved round of applause.
Next, it is my pleasure to introduce this year's Secretary General, Mila Ward. Mila has been a part of the program for nearly 5 years and is one of the program's most passionate members. Her organizational skills were essential to keeping us on track and preparing for the conference, and her sense of humor was greatly appreciated in our long meetings. Madam Secretary General, you now have the floor.
Inequality starts with the lottery of birth. The result of this lottery is me, a white female born to German and American parents in Berlin. Note what's missing in that self-description. I did not mention my family's social status, income, or wealth. Many topics are considered taboo. Perhaps they are uncomfortable. But for this year's conference to mean anything to us, we must be honest and aware of our privilege. Looking across this room and considering that I know nothing about your circumstances, I will assume that of the 8.2 billion people on Earth, most of us have grown up rather privileged. The least I can say with certainty is that we all go to schools with extracurriculars like MUN and the means to travel to a conference like BERMUN. Considering that, my question today is what responsibilities come with winning in the lottery of birth, as most of us have. We do not control where, when, or to whom people are born. Yet we are responsible for addressing the inequalities of life thereafter. The UN recognizes inequality as one of the greatest threats to long-term social and economic development, ending poverty, and offering humanity a fulfilled existence. I'll address this by focusing on economic, gender, and educational inequality. Let us begin with economic inequalities. Take the country we are in right now, Germany, which undoubtedly has a strong social net. Yet even here, during a short walk from Kudamm to Bahnhof Zoo, you will first see the wealthy browsing through luxury stores, then homeless people seeking shelter from the cold, begging for money and food. Beyond disparities between rich and poor, the UN suggests that a high level of income and wealth inequality is propelling the rise of nativism and nationalism. I hope to speak for us all when saying international cooperation lies closer to our hearts than nationalism. So, risking not only economic disparities and poverty, nationalism is tied to economic inequality as well. To solve this, the UN says we must decrease income and wealth inequality. As economically privileged individuals, likely looking to remain in the comfort of our social classes, if not exceed them, are we willing to enforce things that may mean sacrifice? Consider this while I list 3 dimensions of economic inequalities. The first is individual income inequality. Here, the focus is on wage policies. The minimum wage is the bare minimum, a legal tool to protect workers from exploitation and extreme poverty. But to bridge economic divides, living wages are necessary. Living wages ensure access to all basic needs adjusted to a country's economy. The second dimension is wealth and inheritance. The UN strongly encourages the implementation of a wealth tax, which focuses mainly on its first sustainable development goal of ending poverty. According to the World Bank, societal poverty affects over 2 billion people worldwide. Since so much wealth is concentrated at the top, a wealth tax of just 5% on the top 1% would be enough to lift all these people out of poverty. Now, my net worth does not trump 3 million euro, as it would if I belonged to the 1%. But even just hypothetically, does this feel fair? Tying to this, some politicians on the left ask, should billionaires even exist? Speaking of billionaires, the third dimension is corporate taxation. This includes commitments to equitable taxation of multinational companies to address tax evasion by high net worth individuals. For example, today, the US loses $500 billion to tax evasion by multinational companies. There is something deeply psychological about not wanting to share. A fitting German word is Geiz. Geiz describes a greedy, frugal unwillingness to share, often tied to a belief that you are more deserving than others. A study showed how Geiz, in combination with jealousy, can impact how people wish to distribute resources. Take this ultimatum. You get 10 euro while your neighbor gets 20. Or you get 8 while they get 5. Which do you choose? A 2019 study found that children over the age of 10 prefer getting more relative to others than maximizing their gain. It is not a sin to enjoy our privilege. However, it would be a sin to be geizig. Being willing to honestly reflect on our priorities and share our resources, time, energy, and opportunities with others is where the responsibility of the lottery winners lies. Moving on to gender inequality. Gender equality has been a goal of the UN since its founding. Yet nearly 80 years later, women still face discrimination in the form of legal and societal restrictions, as well as violence and human rights abuses. Achieving gender equality, SDG 5, must be addressed with an understanding of 2 distinct realities: societies that are gender progressive and those where women still face extreme inequality. In developed nations, legal rights exist, but true equality remains elusive. Women earn less, leadership roles remain male-dominated, bodily autonomy remains an issue, and rising right-wing politics threaten progress. Studies show that as gender equality advances, male voters increasingly shift toward conservatism. This triggers certain questions. Are women being prioritized because of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Do men not like working harder because of added competition? Uncomfortable questions must be asked. but ultimately, ignorance from either side risks backlash. Therefore, ensuring men are included, not alienated in this conversation is a must. In other regions, gender equality is about mere survival. While I discuss equal pay, UNICEF records that 129 million girls worldwide are forced into child marriage, labor, or denied education. Oppressive regimes like the Taliban in Afghanistan contribute to abuses of women's rights. Here, women can't attend school past 6th grade, exit the house with parts of their body visible, speak in public, and the list goes on. What can we do as those lucky enough to be born in countries where women are free? We have the ability and responsibility of a voice. We also have the ability and responsibility to respect and treat one another equally, regardless of gender. We must not take our privilege for granted and must focus on finding a middle ground between men and women. The third inequality that has to be addressed is education. Would you give up your spot in school so that someone else attending a poorly funded school could get a better education? You may be nobler than me, but I would not. This may be my Geiz, but tying back to the lottery of birth, there is likely no reason I deserve it more than anyone else. My education equals opportunity, freedom, and likely financial independence. Not everyone gets this luxury. In fact, 244 million children lack schooling, equal to the populations of Germany, France, Italy, and Poland combined. Educational and economic inequalities are closely connected. If you are poor, it's less likely you will get a quality education. Receiving a low-quality education is a predictor of low income. This self-perpetuating cycle is addressed in SDG 4, calling for inclusive and equitable quality education for all. The privileged have a responsibility to use their education for more than personal gains. They have a responsibility to create opportunities for others. What could this look like? My school, JFK, is a place where students profit from a quality education. Our student council presidents recently organized an assembly with the help of technology, engaged administration, and helpful teachers to give a voice to a man named George. He was a janitor at our school. Born in Ghana and being incredibly hardworking, he made it to Germany, where amongst many other hardships, he had to face disrespect at our school for being a janitor. By giving him a platform to tell his story, the student council increased respect towards janitors at our school. This is what I mean. You can affect your community by using your privilege to create opportunities. Why, you may ask, do we, the privileged, have responsibility? Because we are not only the leaders of tomorrow, as we are often told. We are also the future rich. As future politicians, lawyers, men and women in finance, doctors, etc., we have the potential ability to transform and change lives for the better. Looking towards the future, the next few days in committee, and your whole lives, I would like you to remember this. Our privilege in the lottery of birth is not our sin. It is our duty. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General, for your remarks on the responsibilities that come with privilege. Please accept this token of our appreciation.
For the past few months, it has been our pleasure to work with this year's team of student officers. Their contributions to each committee in terms of insight, character, and leadership enrich all of our experiences at BERMUN2. We will now introduce the student officers of BERMUN2 2025 by their respective committees. When you are called, please join us in giving them a well-deserved round of applause. Student officers, please stand when we call your name.
The chairs of the middle school MUN who are joining us over the live stream are Frieda Katzenstein and Erika Mosse. Please let them hear your applause in the Jakob-Kaiser-Saal from here.
The presidents of the Security Council are Greta Zoll, Felix Striegel, and Meraki Tadesse.
The presidents of the International Court of Justice are Benjamin von Schweinitz, Christian Greve, and Susanna Skinner.
The presidents of the Economic and Social Council are Ilian Baudet, Ben Vogt, and Julian Falk.
The chairs of the International Labor Organization are Clement Schmid, Malcolm Wood, and Hamilton Turner.
The chairs of the Disarmament Committee are K.O. Casper, Giselle Bouillon, and Jacob Bavarnik.
The chairs of the Social, Humanitarian, and Cultural Committee are Micah Hardester, Bernard Thomas, and Benjamin Musseri.
We would also like to acknowledge the whole administrative staff, headed by Tamar Popper, Naomi Tucker, and Lindy Suyak.
Additionally, we would like to recognize our press editor-in-chief, Zoe Lehmann. These student officers have proven to be an enthusiastic and resourceful team. Their hard work and commitment will make this year's conference an especially unforgettable event.
And this time, it is my distinct honor to declare the 20th Annual BERMUN2 Conference as officially open. Distinguished ambassadors, you will now address the forum and weigh in on the conference theme. We will be calling on 6 speakers at a time. Please hold your applause until all 6 speeches are finished. After these speeches, we will be accepting rights to reply. A right to reply is a rhetorical question to one of the speakers which will not be answered. We ask that you keep your rights to reply clear and concise. If you are called on for a right to reply, please use the microphone in front of you by pressing the button. If you do not have a microphone in front of you, please wait until a member of the admin staff gives you one. The first ambassador will be randomly selected by our keynote speaker, Mr. Exo Kreischer. After that, we'll be calling on speakers alphabetically. Ambassadors, if your name is called, please approach the podium in the order that you've been called on. Once again, please hold your applause until all 6 speeches are finished.
The winner is Ukraine.
You may now elaborate.
Esteemed chairs, dear delegates, honorable guests, thank you for giving us the opportunities to speak here at this conference. Due to the fact that our citizens have been forcibly displaced throughout the world, seeking humanitarian aid and refuge, we are well aware of the inequality plaguing many people of not just our country, but of the entire world. Therefore, it must not be a choice, but a mandatory act to help the ones who are being faced with the consequences of inequality. To do this, we need reforms and changes, such as economic reforms, healthcare and social protection, gender and racial equality, climate justice, and much more. Let us stand together, not as separate nations, but as a united force against inequality, ensuring that no one is left behind, and that justice, dignity, and opportunity are a reality for all. Thank you.
Please remain by the dais. We will now entertain one right to reply. Are there any such on the floor? Seeing as there are none, we will now hear from the ambassadors of the UK, Belgium, Canada, and China. Please line up to the right side of the podium. Thank you, Ambassador of Ukraine.
Thank
you. Important information for all ambassadors. After you have held your opening speech, please wait until all other speakers have finished their speeches before returning to your seat. Please also remember that speeches should not be longer than 1 minute. After 1 minute has passed, we will hit the gavel to remind you to come to your closing remarks. Please give every ambassador the respect that they deserve and listen attentively. You now have the floor.
Honorable Secretary, distinguished delegates, the United Kingdom stands before you today with a clear and unwavering vision, a world where opportunity is not dedicated by birthplace, background, or circumstance. We believe that the true strength of a nation is not measured by the wealth of the few, but by the well-being of all. The United Kingdom stands firm in its commitment to fight inequality and ensuring fair labor standards for all workers, at home and across the world. We believe that a just society is one where economic progress does not come at the cost of human dignity, where wages reflect the true value of labor, and where no worker is left behind. We acknowledge that inequality, whether economic, racial, gender-based, or social, remains one of the greatest challenges of our time. Beyond our borders, we recognize our responsibility in the global fight against inequality. We are campaigning fair trade, supporting sustainable development, and are driving international efforts to address poverty and climate injustice. Through initiatives like the UK's commitment to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and our leadership in humanitarian aid, we reaffirm our belief that no nation should be left behind. We must be clear, economic stability is needed, but we have to safeguard human dignity. So let us work together to build a future where prosperity is shared, where work uplifts rather than oppresses, and where no person is forced to choose between their survival and their rights. Thank you.
Please hold your applause until all speakers have spoken. You may now elaborate.
Honorable Mr. President and Secretariat, esteemed chairs and fellow delegates, the Kingdom of Belgium is deeply committed to addressing the issue of inequality, which remains a global challenge. In today's world, where social and economic gaps are widening, it is essential that we work together to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background, has the same opportunities. Belgium has made significant progress in challenging inequality through advanced taxation, investments in education, and strong social programs. We have also taken steps to close the gender pay gap and improve women's participation in leadership roles. However, much remains to be done within our kingdom, but more importantly, globally. We call on the international community to work together and ensure equal access to quality education, healthcare, and sustainable economic resources. Fair conditions and policies promoting wage equality, regardless of gender, race, or origin, are also crucial in this fight. If we all work together at this conference, we are able to achieve the best possible solution for every member. Thank you.
Madam President, honorable chairs, esteemed delegates, the relevance of our subject is growing every day. Sometimes our closest allies turn their backs on us and on their people too. But we remain strong, we remain optimistic, and most importantly, we remain kind. This conference, a choir of worldwide effort, is still far from achieving equality it aspires to. Too often, some voices are given more weight than others. For it to change, we, with voices loud, shall not seek to overpower those whose voice is quieter than ours, but try to give them power required for our song. Because true equality demands intentional effort, and true peace requires relentless action. Let each step we take today be one closer to the world where justice is no longer a distant hope, but a living reality. Thank you for your attention.
Give a man a fish, and he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he eats for a lifetime. This Chinese proverb applies not only to individuals, but also to nations in the fight against inequality. While subsidies and quotas may provide temporary relief from its effects, true eradication demands we address the root of these injustices by fostering equality of opportunity. Through economic growth and investments in infrastructure, China strives to tackle inequality from the ground up. Since 1978, economic growth in China, for example, has allowed the income for the bottom 50% of earners to increase 5-fold. However, in order to advance globally, we must ensure that no nation is left behind. Through the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, all citizens in over 140 member states benefit from opportunities for prosperity. While inequalities, as a result of gender, race, sexuality, or income, continue to plague many nations, failing to address the source of these injustices forces marginalized communities to struggle for equal opportunity. Instead, we must ride the rough waters of inequality as a united nation. Because when we teach our citizens to fish, we provide not only resources for today, but also skills and opportunities for tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right to reply, please raise your placards now. This can be to any one of the ambassadors. Delegate of Ecuador.
Delegation of China. Why does China mention sexuality if China is against LGBTQ people?
Any other delegation wishing to make a point? Costa Rica.
So the delegation of Costa Rica would like to ask the delegation of China how they can dare about protection of marginalized groups when they are currently actively suppressing the group of the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region of their own country.
Thank you, Delegate. Is there any other right to reply in the House? Delegate of Germany.
The delegate of Germany would like to ask the delegate of the UK how they can say that they strive for unity and cooperation and economic equality when they leave the European Union, a union that is known for its economic prospects and opportunities throughout Europe.
Thank you, ambassadors. Please take your seats.
The next opening speeches will be coming from France, Germany, Guyana, Indonesia, Israel, and Italy. Ambassadors, please approach the podium.
If you could stand up here, and then the rest of you, if you could line up in the order that you're going to speak. What's the order? You're next. You're right after France. Okay.
Do I set it up?
Okay. Honorable chairs, dear delegates, and esteemed guests. The French Republic encourages all member states to envision a new world, a world in which inequality has been eradicated, a world in which every individual is treated equally. We vow to make this dream a reality. In 2021, the French Parliament adopted the Act on Combating Global Inequalities. As the world's 5th largest donor, we are providing ourselves with the means to effectively combat global inequalities. Tackling situations of fragility and ensuring peace and stability, taking action to fight against climate change, and supporting gender equality, one of the great causes of President Macron's 5-year term. Furthermore, we have tirelessly assisted vulnerable nations in addressing inequalities, particularly in African nations. These acts have all exemplified our commitment to prioritizing equality above all. We would like to motivate all other member states to do the same, to continue to provide aid and to foster international cooperation. With these in mind, we look forward to addressing this pressing concern with the collaborative efforts of all member states to make our dream world a reality for all. Thank you.
Honorable President, magnificently skilled Secretary General, esteemed Deputy Secretary Generals, distinguished ambassadors, honorable delegates of the sovereign nations and NGOs of the United Nations, hardworking staff, hiding yet always relevant news team, supreme eminent directors, and honored guests present at the 2025 BERMUN Spring Conference. There we go. It is a great honor and pleasure to stand here before you ready to collectively and tolerantly discuss the crucial, inescapable, and undeniable challenges our world currently faces. The issue of fighting inequality is growing ever more important. Over the last few years, the world has witnessed the vast, atrocious consequences of inequalities, whether they be sexual, racial, ethnic, religious, or social inequalities, and the time to act came a long time ago. However, it is never too late to right a wrong, and the Federal Republic of Germany is ready to let the making of solutions begin through open-minded and hopefully fruitful debate with our fellow, deeply honorable member states, NGOs, and NGOs with this common goal. Thank you.
Dear House, inequality is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Guyana drowns while other collect spoils. We mine the gold that fills Farian bank accounts, drill oil that powers industries, and protect forests that offset your emissions. Yet the world flaws outwards. When we demand fairness, we face debt traps, empty plates warped in diplomatic language. Some here do not fear inequality. You profit from it. You tax our resources, but not your emissions. You flood us with loans, then call us unstable. You shake hands at summits, then sign deals that keep us dependent. It is time to change. Guyana calls for partnership rooted in equality and shared responsibility, where every nation can rise and where the marginalized are not just acknowledged, but celebrated. Thank you.
Honorable Secretariat, esteemed delegates, imagine a child standing amidst the ruins of conflict, their future shaped not by their dreams, but by the divisions of the past. Imagine a community seeking hope, but finding only barriers built by fear. This is the harsh reality faced by millions in post-conflict zones, where ethnic inequalities persist as silent threats to peace. Indonesia refuses to accept this fate. We stand before you today as a nation that understands the power of unity. With over 300 ethnic groups living together, we know that diversity is a strength we have learned, and that peace is more than the absence of conflict. It is the presence of justice and equality. We believe that addressing ethnic inequalities is essential to healing wounds of war and preventing future violence. By empowering marginalized communities, ensuring fair political representation, and promoting dialogue, we can build societies where all voices are heard. Indonesia is committed to working with all nations to turn division into unity and despair into hope. Let us act not only as representatives of our countries, but as partners in building a peaceful world. Thank you.
Honorable chairs, fellow delegates, Israel recognizes inequality as a fundamental global challenge that affects millions based solely on their birthplace and background. Through education and technological innovation, we've created opportunities for people of diverse backgrounds to succeed, where we share these solutions internationally, from water conservation to medical advances, helping other communities develop sustainable solutions. But this fight requires global cooperation. No country can solve this alone. We must collectively invest in education, healthcare, and economic opportunities to ensure no one is left behind. Together, we can build a world where success depends on merit and hard work, not circumstance or privilege. Let's move beyond discussion to action, ensuring every person has a fair chance to succeed. Thank you.
Honored Secretariat, fellow Excellencies, distinguished delegates and guests. At this time, we stand at a crossroad in history. In a world wealthier than ever, the divide between prosperity and poverty has never been more profound. Millions are denied not only opportunity, but dignity. The dignity of a fair wage, a decent home, a life free from hunger, war, and suffering. Italy refuses to accept a world where fate is determined by birthplace and is appalled that many delegations in this room seem to do. Inequality is not a natural order. It is a failure of policy, of conscience, and of collective will. While we must learn from our past mistake, the delegation of Italy believes the international community has learned enough to know that the current course of the world is unjustified and cruel. Italy stands unwavering in its commitment to a just and equal world, while we believe that fairness, opportunity, and dignity should be the birthright of all, not the privilege of a few. So let us, as we move forward, act with courage and conviction to build a future where no nation, community, village, or person is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right to reply, please raise your placards now. Ambassadors, please remain on the podium. The first right to reply will be coming from the delegate of Palestine.
Hello, and to the ambassador of Israel, I would like to ask how he can speak of equality if Israelis troops are destroying our homes in Gaza and destroying our schools. How can there be equality?
Are there any further rights to reply? The next right to reply will be coming from the delegate of Costa Rica, the one to the right.
So this point of information also goes to the delegation of Israel. When equality is so important to you, why won't there be equal chances and rights for the Palestinians in Israel? Or do those equal rights and chances only apply to your allies and buddies?
And any further rights to reply on the floor? The next one will be coming from the delegate of the USA.
The delegate of the USA has a question for the ambassador of France. How can the delegate praise President Macron's aid in relation to African countries while simultaneously going on record to make discriminatory statements of African citizens?
Thank you, ambassadors. Please return to your seats.
The next opening speeches will be coming from Japan, Kenya, Myanmar, Pakistan, Peru, and the Russian Federation. Ambassadors, please approach the podium.
You may now begin.
Esteemed President of the General Assembly, honored Secretariat, honorable chairs, fellow delegates, distinguished guests. Japan firmly believes that inequality in all its forms undermines global peace and prosperity. We are committed to creating a world where every individual has access to equal opportunities, whether through fair labor practices, education, or gender equality. A more inclusive society leads to greater stability, innovation, and shared success. At this conference, Japan will actively engage in the Disarmament Committee, the International Labour Organization, the Social, Humanitarian, and Cultural Committee, the Economic and Social Council, and Middle School MUN to address the root causes of inequality. We call on all nations to work together toward practical solutions, ensuring no one is left behind. Meaningful change is only possible through cooperation, and together we can build a more just and equitable future. Thank you.
Honourable chairs, dear fellow delegates and esteemed guests. As the Ambassador of Kenya, it is a great honour to be here and take part in this conference. All our nations are diverse, from one another and within themselves. With more than 40 ethnic groups, Kenya brings together a multitude of cultures, tribes, and religions. This diversity, however, should not lead to inequality. It is crucial to reduce disparities in education, employment, wealth distribution, and opportunities for our young generation. Our efforts in economic recovery and social development show that progress is possible. However, the importance lies in fighting this global issue of inequality as a union. We're not only here to discuss, but to forge solutions. As our first president, Jomo Kenyatta, once said, "Our children may learn about the heroes of the past. Our task is to make ourselves the architects of the future." So let us together be the architects of an equal and just world. Thank you.
Honorable General Secretariat, esteemed chairs, fellow delegates, distinguished guests. We, the delegation of Myanmar, are honored to be participating in BERMUN2 2025. The theme of this conference is addressing inequality. We believe that the greatest inequality is that between the global south and the global north. It is the most pressing issue of our time, as all issues ranging from climate change to terrorism stem from this inequality. Wealthy nations go so far as to fund rebels within other sovereign United Nations member states in order to secure their own wealth. Think of Congo, Sudan, Haiti, Ethiopia, and even Myanmar. Since the noon of January 20th, 2025, the United States has dropped all its false pretenses of safeguarding democracy and helping the poor and needy. It has now halted all attempts to deal with the damage that it has caused throughout this world. We stand at a crossroad. These following 3 days will lay the groundwork for a new international order, a change that hasn't been witnessed since the end of World War II. So I ask you, fellow delegates, will you work together to improve the lives of our citizens, or will you remain stuck in the past, sucking up to empires that are clawing onto power by any means necessary? Thank you.
Honorable chairs, distinguished delegates, and fellow participants. Inequality is like a cracked mirror. It distorts our world, creating a reflection where the few shine brightly while the rest are left in shadows. Today, Pakistan invites you to join us in fixing that mirror, because only when we see the world clearly can we truly change it. Pakistan has walked the fine line between adversity and resilience, from devastating floods to economic struggles. We've learned that inequality isn't just a challenge, it's a thief. It steals opportunities, dignity, and hope, and we're here to stop it. Now, fighting inequality isn't easy. Yet, Pakistan believes in teamwork. We believe that when nations come together with fairness, humility, and purpose, we can rewrite the rules of the game. Inequality is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to prove that we can do better. Pakistan isn't asking for favors. We're offering a partnership. Let's work together to create a world where success isn't determined by your zip code, but by your potential. Because in the end, fixing that cracked mirror doesn't just benefit the shadows, it makes the whole picture brighter. Thank you.
Honorable Secretary Generals, esteemed chairs, welcome guests, fellow delegates, and judges. Imagine a world where your future is not determined by your birthplace, your gender, or your background. A world where opportunity is not a privilege, but a right. This is the world that Peru envisions, and more importantly, this is the world we should strive to create. However, inequality silences voices, limits potential, and deepens division in our society. In Peru, we have worked tirelessly to bridge these gaps through social programs, digital inclusion, and gender equality. Yet, this is an issue that no nation can handle alone. So, how can we speak of progress when millions are still being left behind? Therefore, Peru calls for real collective action, policies that empower, resources that uplift, and partnerships that create lasting change. Let us not merely entertain these ideas of equality, but instead, let's make them a reality. Thank you.
Distinguished members of the General Assembly, honorable guests, the Russian Federation stands before you today with a vision of a stable future, one where nations draw strength not from externally imposed ideologies, but from their own traditions and governance. Stability cannot be dictated by ineffective universal policies. It must be built from within. Inequality exists in all nations, but solutions must respect cultural identity and national sovereignty, not be imposed through outside pressure. While we acknowledge financial disparities, no singular model can resolve them all. Each nation must address its economic challenges in accordance with its own history, values, and leadership. The global order is evolving. Russia stands as a pillar of stability, committed to a multipolar world where nations shape their own destinies. We urge the international community to recognize Russia as a stabilizing force, one that does not impose but leads with conviction. Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to make use of a right of reply, please raise your placards now. Delegate of South Sudan.
How does the ambassador of Myanmar believe that they can be talking about empowering the civilians when they have been systematically killing multiple people of different ethnic groups within their own country.
Are there any other rights of reply? Delegate of Syria, you have been recognized.
The delegation of Syria would like to ask the delegation of Russia how Bashar al-Assad is doing in Moscow and how long he plans to hide there.
We will take one more right of reply. Delegate of Denmark, but the middle delegate.
How can the delegate of Russia talk about national sovereignty when invading another country?
Thank you, ambassadors. Thank you, delegates.
The final opening speeches will be coming from Sierra Leone, Somalia, South Africa, Sweden, Switzerland, Tunisia, and the United States of America. Ambassadors, please approach the podium. Delegate of Sierra Leone, you may begin.
Couché, honorable chairs, esteemed delegates, and guests. There is one sector where Sierra Leone stands proudly as #1 in the world: the percentage of national spending dedicated to education. Yes, we are a small nation with limited resources, and we face significant challenges. But let us be clear, relying on foreign aid only perpetuates a cycle of dependency and poverty. The true path to breaking the cycle of inequality is through the empowerment of our people. How can we bring lasting change if we do not equip ourselves with the knowledge to do so? How can we build a sustainable future without the tools to create it? Brothers and sisters, we face challenges, both great and small, but we must never lose sight of what matters the most: our children. Let us continue to prioritize education, for in doing so, we are investing in a future where our people can stand in their own, charter their own course, and lift our nation to greater heights. Thank you.
Honorable Chair, distinguished delegates, and dear guests, will our next generation be able to say good morning? That is the question we would like each of you to ask yourself. Today, our world faces global and interconnected crises. Global warming, poverty, lack of education, and wars are challenges that transcend borders and demand unified actions. As the delegate of South Africa, we stand here today with a deep understanding of the struggles faced by developing nations that often go unnoticed by the global stage. But we believe that with cooperation, innovation, and commitment, we can create the world where peace replaces conflict, prosperity overcomes poverty, and knowledge becomes a universal right, not a privilege. Thank you.
Honorable President, distinguished delegates, let me tell you about Amina. She wakes up before dawn, walking miles to fetch water instead of going to school, not because she lacks ambition, but because poverty has stolen her chance. Meanwhile, across the world, another girl wakes up in comfort, with every opportunity before her. Not because she is more deserving, but simply because where she was born. This is inequality. This is brutal. But no matter how hard Amina tries, all efforts Somalia, as a great sovereign state, takes do not have the power to stop inequality. This is a global issue. This needs to be faced globally. But to face this, we'll all have to make a choice. We'll have to make a choice now. A choice of fairness over privilege, of opportunity over exclusion, of justice over injustice. We, as the United Nations, might be the only force to fight against it, to fight inequality. Thank you.
Honorable speakers, esteemed delegates, dear guests, our fundamental human rights, the bedrock of justice, they are under constant threat from the pervasive issue of inequality, which jeopardizes the well-being of future generations. Sweden's constitution, revised in 1975, enshrines the equal worth, freedom, and dignity of all individuals. Our strong welfare system, providing pensions, universal health care, and free education, has helped to create a more just society while fostering inclusive economic success and innovation through well-known companies. However, challenges persist. In addressing wealth disparities, regional inequalities, and ensuring equitable access to education and healthcare that require our perception of inequality. This is why Sweden is deeply committed to Sustainable Development Goal 10, striving to promote equal opportunities and inclusive policies, both domestically and especially globally. We strongly advocate in investing in healthcare, education, and a social security system to ensure inclusive economic growth. Fighting inequality requires collective action, with all nations being accountable for a more just, fair, and sustainable society. Thank you.
Inequality is like a growing crack in the foundation of our societies. If left unchecked, it threatens to weaken everything we have built. It divides communities, fuels instability, and limits opportunity. As a nation that has long championed human dignity and social cohesion, Switzerland recognizes that inequality is not merely about income disparities. It manifests in unequal access to education, healthcare, technology, and opportunities for advancement. But no single nation can tackle these challenges alone. The path forward requires genuine multilateral cooperation and shared responsibilities. Because what are we, if not mayfly creatures in the end? Zoom in out of mine, my, yours, theirs, remembering again to pray, again to cower, again, hoping that for whoever comes after, there's laughter, there's progress, there's human invention. So together, let us strive to create a world where no one is left behind, a world where equality is not just an unrealistic dream, but a reality. Thank you.
Honored chairs, honored delegates, Tunisia stands before this assembly with a clear message. Economic inequality is not just a statistic, it is a barrier to peace, progress, and human dignity. A decade after the Arab Spring, our nation remains a symbol of both struggle and resilience, a reminder that economic injustice fuels instability. Wealth inequality is a global crisis, deepening divides within and between nations. While a small elite accumulates immense wealth, millions remain trapped in poverty, deprived of opportunities. Tunisia has taken decisive steps, expanding social protection, supporting entrepreneurship, and advancing regional development. But national efforts alone are not enough. We call upon international financial institutions to enact fairer economic policies, reduce debt burdens, and promote equitable access to global markets. Tunisia stands ready to collaborate with fellow member states to build an economic system that prioritizes people over profit. Together, let us forge a future where prosperity is a right, not a privilege. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We have gathered here in Berlin to discuss one of the most pressing challenges of our time, fighting inequality. Inequality is a stubborn opponent. It exists in wealth, education, healthcare, and perhaps most unfairly, in the fact that some people can wake up looking effortlessly perfect while the rest of us rely on caffeine and optimism. But in all seriousness, inequality is not just an abstract concept. It is a lived reality for millions around the world. It is the reason some children are denied education, some families struggle to afford basic healthcare, and some voices are silenced while others are amplified. We as young people have both the privilege and the responsibility to challenge these injustices. But the question is how?
We can sit here making grand speeches, but real change requires action. It requires policies that empower rather than exclude, economies that uplift rather than exploit, and leaders who listen rather than dictate. As we debate, let us remember that fighting inequality is not just about numbers on a page. It is about dignity, opportunity, and fairness. And if we, as the next generation of global leaders, cannot stand for that, then who will? Thank you.
Thank you, ambassadors. If there are any delegates wishing to hold a right to reply, please raise your placards now. Delegate of Canada, you have been recognized. Delegate of China, you have been recognized.
How can the delegate of the USA claim that they fight for equality when it is their country who is not standing for any equality, given the recent political and policy changes, such as the striking of US aid, to name just one of a countless number?
Thank you. Are there any delegates wishing to hold a final right to reply? Delegate of Denmark.
Which one?
Okay, to the USA. How can you talk about wanting to work against inequality when you want to buy a part of our country, like it's your right as a richer country to take?
Thank you, delegates. Ambassadors, please take your seats.
At this time, we would like to extend our sincerest gratitude to Alexander Ginter, who has worked on perfecting the platform throughout the last few years. Alexander, your contributions have been crucial in our digital and in-person conferences. Given that you are former head of our tech team, it is all the more special to work with you once again. Thank you for all your fantastic work and efforts to make this conference all the better.
Before we adjourn, we have a few brief but very important announcements. If you would like to keep updated with what is happening during the BERMUN conference, the BERMUN press team will report its work on the BERMUN website under bermun.de. You can also access this page by clicking on the news section on the BERMUN platform. The press team also has an Instagram account called bermun.press.
This year, for the first time, BERMUN Press will also be available on the JFKS Chronicle app. Make sure to download the app on the iOS App Store. The app gives you convenient access to articles on the conference. Be sure to stay updated with reports about the entire conference by reading the press articles. The press team will also be reporting about our guest speaker event that will take place tomorrow. Dr. Nathaniel Robbins is a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute, and we look forward to hear him speak on gender inequality.
BERMUN merch, including mugs, bottles, tote bags, and a limited number of hoodies and posters, will be available after committee sessions each day in the ground floor foyer. Additionally, please bring a reusable water bottle to the conference. We will have large containers of water to refill them. Please do not take more than one drink from the refrigerators in the hallways each day for lunch to ensure that everyone has one. Furthermore, Only take as much coffee or food as you will actually eat, so we can minimize food waste.
We would also like to remind you to make sure that we leave this building even nicer than we found it. Please do not leave any trash lying around, and do not eat or drink in the rooms. The only exception is drinking from a closable water bottle. We are incredibly happy to be here in the CAS, and we want to make sure that we reciprocate that hospitality.
All participants of BERMUN2, you'll be joining your second committee session in your respective committee rooms tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please arrive by 8:30 to be seated in your committees by 9 o'clock. I will now read out the room assignments. You can also see these in the BERMUN program on page 5. If you have any confusion about direction, the admin team will be there to help. SOCM will be in room 6. The ICJ will be in room 7. The SC will be in room 226. The DC will remain here in the forum. The ILO will be in the Jakob Kaiser Saal. The ECOSOC will be in house 2 in rooms 039 through 041. Joining them in house 2 will be MSMUN in room 040. As a final announcement, please do not take your country placards after the ceremony, as they will be moved into your individual committee rooms. Again, please leave your country placards on the counter in front of you. As you leave the forum, please enjoy some music from former head of press, Tony Oldani. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.